What would life look like without rules? A society where nothing governs our actions, where chaos runs unchecked. It's hard to even imagine, isn't it? But there was a time when humanity stood at this very crossroads, when communities faced the daunting question of how to transform disorder into harmony. In this video, we're diving into the pivotal moment when people first began shaping the world with laws. We'll uncover how early lawmakers crafted the blueprints for civilization itself, laying down the codes that defined justice, power, and responsibility. From the renowned Code of Hammurabi to lesser-known yet equally groundbreaking legal systems, these ancient texts didn't just organize societies. They left a legacy that still pulses through our modern world. By the end, you'll see how these early legal codes were about more than rules. They were humanity's first bold step toward creating order out of chaos. Imagine a bustling, early human settlement. Its people waking each morning to tend crops, trade goods, or care for livestock. Life teems with potential, yet beneath this surface lies tension, a constant boiling point of disputes and unrest. Who gets to claim that fertile patch of land? What happens when two families argue over water rights from the same stream? And what of those who take more than their fair share of resources or use force to get their way? This was the reality for early societies as they grew from small, nomadic groups into thriving agricultural communities. With this growth came unprecedented challenges, and at the heart of these challenges lay one profound question: how do we make life fair for everyone? The shift from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to one rooted in agriculture fundamentally changed the way humans lived. For the first time, people were staying in one place, cultivating land and building settlements. But with stationary living came complex interactions. Land, once free and open for everyone to roam, suddenly became valuable. Crops, livestock, and tools turned into measurable wealth. And as wealth emerged, so did competition. It wasn't long before disputes over property, resources, and power became inevitable. Without some form of order to govern this growing complexity, chaos could spread like wildfire. Now imagine a community leader, perhaps a respected elder or even the head of a powerful family, stepping into the role of mediator. When two individuals clashed over a boundary dispute, this leader would hear both sides and make a ruling. In early days, these rulings weren't written down. They were based on tradition, common sense, or the leader's personal sense of justice. But what happened when disputes grew too numerous or when people began questioning the fairness of the leader's decisions? What if the leader himself was tempted to bend justice in his favor? These questions became unavoidable as populations grew and societies became more interconnected through trade. Trade, in particular, added new layers to this societal complexity. As settlements exchanged goods like grains, textiles, and metals, they needed to establish trust. What guarantees did anyone have that a deal would be honored? What stopped one party from taking goods and giving nothing in return? Without rules to enforce agreements, mistrust could grind these early economies to a halt. Laws, therefore, became not just a tool for resolving conflicts, but a means of fostering stability and growth. At the same time, codifying laws, actually writing them down, was a way to prevent the abuse of power. A single leader, unchecked, could easily manipulate outcomes to benefit themselves or their allies. Codified laws served as a public agreement, a framework that everyone could see and understand. They were meant to stand above personal influence, even if enforcement still relied on human leadership. Of course, the question of fairness remained. Could laws truly balance power, or did they simply reflect the priorities of those in control? This tension between power and justice would shape the laws of ancient societies and the leaders who created them. The dawn of order wasn't just about regulating behavior. it was about building trust and protecting the fragile structure of these emerging civilizations. Humans needed laws not merely to limit chaos, but to create a shared understanding of what was right and just. Without this shared understanding, cooperation on a grand scale, whether through agriculture, trade, or cultural development, would have been impossible. As the first lawmakers came forward, whether through wisdom, necessity, or ambition, they set humanity on a path that still guides us today. But how did they ensure these laws endured? And how did they decide what was fair? To explore these questions, we must look to the earliest written codes that gave structure to societies and stamped their values into stone. Let's journey back over 4,000 years ago to the ancient land of Mesopotamia, often heralded as the cradle of civilization. Here, among the bustling cities of Sumer, one leader took a revolutionary step that would echo through the halls of history. His name was King Ur-Nammu, and under his reign, humanity witnessed the creation of something entirely unprecedented, the first known written legal code. The Code of Ur-Nammu, carved into clay tablets, stands as the oldest surviving record of written laws. Dating back to around 2100 BCE, this legal code was a milestone in turning abstract ideas of justice into something tangible and universal. But what made this code so significant? It wasn't just the act of writing laws down. It was the structure, intent, and vision behind them that revealed a groundbreaking shift in how societies were governed. Ur-Nammu's laws covered a wide range of societal issues, reflecting the challenges and priorities of the time. Theft, one of the most common sources of conflict in any society, was addressed with fines that varied based on the value of the stolen goods. In a world where resources like grain or livestock were critical for survival, theft wasn't merely a personal offense, it was a threat to the community's stability. By imposing structured penalties, the law sought not just to punish, but to restore balance and deter further wrongdoing. The code also delved into matters of personal relationships, including marriage. It laid out clear expectations for spouses and even addressed instances of infidelity or divorce. These provisions weren't just about regulating private lives, they were about safeguarding the social fabric. Marriage in ancient Sumer was deeply intertwined with property, inheritance, and alliances, and clear legal guidelines helped prevent disputes that could spiral into larger conflicts. Another key area the code addressed was slavery, an institution that, while abhorrent by today's standards, was a deeply entrenched part of life in ancient Mesopotamia. The laws recognized the rights and obligations of both slaves and their owners, defining boundaries that aimed to prevent excess cruelty or abuse. This may seem paradoxical, but in framing these laws, King Ur-Nammu was acknowledging the humanity of those at the bottom of society's hierarchy, an important step in laying out principles of justice for all. But what gave these laws their authority? For the people of Sumer, law wasn't just a human construct, it was deeply rooted in religion and divine will. King Ur-Nammu claimed legitimacy through the gods, presenting himself as their chosen representative on earth. His legal code began with a prologue, a poetic declaration that invoked the blessings of the gods and highlighted his divinely sanctioned role as a protector of justice. This divine connection wasn't just ceremonial, it was foundational. By grounding his laws in the will of the gods, Ur-Nammu ensured they carried unquestionable weight, binding not just the people, but even the powerful elites to their authority. The Code of Ur-Nammu wasn't just a set of rules, it was a vision for a fairer and more orderly society. It introduced the concept of standardized justice, ensuring that punishments were proportional to the offense, rather than left to the whims of an individual ruler. While later law codes, such as the more famous Code of Hammurabi, would expand on these ideas, Ur-Nammu's work laid the groundwork. It showed that laws could be tools for consistency, balance, and fairness, rather than instruments of unchecked power. These ancient laws also set the tone for the legal systems that followed. Mesopotamia's reliance on written legal codes inspired civilizations across the Mediterranean and beyond. The very idea of codified rules that were clear, accessible, and enforceable is one we still uphold today. So, as we reflect on Ur-Nammu's code, we can see it not just as an artifact of the past, but as the seed from which modern legal systems have grown. But how exactly did these early codes evolve and influence later societies? To uncover that, we must look further down the timeline to another great Mesopotamian ruler and one of the most famous legal codes of all time, the Code of Hammurabi. Now, let's turn to one of the most iconic legal codes in human history, the Code of Hammurabi. Inscribed more than 3,700 years ago, this remarkable set of laws was the work of King Hammurabi, the ruler of Babylon, who reigned during the 18th century BC. His code wasn't just an administrative tool, it was a declaration of power, justice, and divine authority, etched into a 7-foot-tall black stone stele for all to see. Even today, the Code of Hammurabi stands as a testament to the complexities of early governance and humanity's enduring quest for justice. The Code of Hammurabi is best known for its principle of retributive justice, summarized by the phrase, "an eye for an eye." This idea, the notion that the punishment should mirror the crime, captured the imagination of scholars and the public alike when the stele was rediscovered in the early 20th century. But while this concept might seem straightforward, a closer look reveals that Hammurabi's laws were far from simple. They were tailored not just to the crime itself, but to the status of the individuals involved. At its core, Hammurabi's code reflected a hierarchical society. The severity of a punishment often depended on whether the person harmed was a noble, a commoner, or a slave. For instance, if someone injured a noble, the consequences could be far more severe than if the same harm was done to someone of lower rank. This differentiation reveals how deeply stratified Babylonian society was, with law and order serving not just to maintain justice, but also to reinforce existing social structures. It's a stark reminder that while the code sought fairness in its own way, its fairness was filtered through the lens of inequality. Hammurabi's laws extended across nearly every facet of life, providing a window into the daily concerns of ancient Babylon. They addressed property disputes, trade agreements, marital obligations, and even medical malpractice. For example, if a builder constructed a house that later collapsed and killed its inhabitants, the builder could face death. While this might seem harsh, it shows how Hammurabi used his laws to instill accountability in professions critical to the community's survival. Similarly, merchants who cheated customers faced strict penalties, underscoring the importance of trust in Babylon's vibrant trade networks. Yet Hammurabi's laws didn't just focus on punishment, they also sought to protect the vulnerable. The code included provisions for widows, orphans, and those in debt, attempting to shield them from exploitation. For example, creditors were prohibited from taking essential tools or property as collateral, ensuring that even the poorest individuals could continue to work and support themselves. These measures reveal an underlying desire to balance the scales, at least to some extent, in a world fraught with inequality. The stele itself, on which these laws were inscribed, is as fascinating as the code it bears. At the top, it depicts Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the Mesopotamian god of justice, who is shown handing the king a rod and ring, symbols of authority. This imagery wasn't accidental, it was a deliberate attempt to establish the divine legitimacy of Hammurabi's rule. To the people of Babylon, these laws weren't merely the edicts of a mortal king, they were mandates from the gods themselves, channeled through their chosen ruler. When this monumental stele was unearthed by French archaeologists in modern-day Iran in the early 1900s, it reshaped our understanding of ancient governance. For centuries, historians had relied on scattered records and fragmented tablets to piece together the legal systems of ancient Mesopotamia. The discovery of the Code of Hammurabi provided a comprehensive, intact example that revealed the sophistication of these early societies. It showed that governance wasn't just about maintaining order. It was about defining the values of a civilization and creating a shared sense of justice, even if that justice was far from equal. However, the Code of Hammurabi also raises questions that resonate to this day. Were its harsh punishments effective at deterring crime, or did they simply enforce obedience through fear? Did its focus on maintaining societal hierarchies create stability, or did it entrench divisions that bred resentment? These debates remain relevant as we continue to grapple with how laws can promote fairness while balancing authority and compassion. As we reflect on Hammurabi's legacy, we see a ruler who sought to control an empire not just with swords and armies, but with words etched in stone. His laws were a tool of power, yes, but they were also a vision of order, a way to navigate the chaos of human society. Yet Hammurabi's code was not the only approach to governance in the ancient world. Across the Mediterranean, different societies were crafting their own legal traditions, offering alternative ideas about justice and fairness. Let's explore how these diverse approaches shaped the legal landscapes of early civilizations. While Mesopotamia often dominates the conversation around ancient legal systems, it's important to remember that other cultures of the ancient world were also weaving their own distinct tapestries of justice. One such civilization was the Hittites, whose empire thrived in Anatolia, or what is now modern-day Turkey, around 3000 to 1200 BCE. Unlike the harsh retribution of Hammurabi's code, the Hittites took a notably different approach to law and order, one that reflected both their unique societal values and their practical way of life. Their legal codes reveal a society more focused on restoration and compensation than on strict punishment, presenting a fascinating contrast to their Mesopotamian neighbors. At the heart of Hittite law was the principle of making things right rather than exacting vengeance. For example, while Hammurabi's code might prescribe an eye for an eye punishment for harm caused, Hittite laws often preferred financial compensation. If one person injured another or damaged their property, the law typically required the offender to pay restitution rather than endure physical punishment or severe retribution. This principle extended to many offenses, whether someone stole livestock or accidentally caused harm to another person during a dispute. The focus on repayment rather than corporal punishment or death paints a picture of a society that valued reconciliation and balance, aiming to repair harm and maintain harmony within the community. This emphasis on compensation also extended to how the Hittites treated property and inheritance disputes. Property, especially land, was central to Hittite life, and laws were carefully constructed to address conflicts over boundaries, ownership, and inheritance. Unlike the strict class-based distinctions seen in Hammurabi's code, the Hittite legal system emphasized practical solutions. For instance, specific guidelines were laid out for resolving disputes over shared resources like water or grazing land, ensuring that neither side gained an unfair advantage. It speaks to the Hittites' pragmatism and their deep understanding of the importance of cooperation in an agrarian society. But what really sets the Hittites apart is how their laws reflected nuanced views of gender roles and responsibilities, nuances that were sometimes far ahead of their time. In Hittite society, women held legal rights that were relatively advanced for the ancient world. They could own property, inherit land, and even engage in contracts. For instance, if a woman was widowed, Hittite laws ensured that she retained her husband's property, rather than having it revert back to his family or other male relatives. This provided a level of protection and independence that was rare in many ancient societies. However, it's important to note that these rights were not absolute, and men still dominated many legal and social spheres. Even so, the inclusion of women's rights in the legal code suggests an acknowledgement of their significant role within Hittite society. Another surprising aspect of Hittite law was its treatment of animals. While most ancient legal systems focused solely on the relationships between humans, Hittite laws included provisions that revealed a sense of accountability for how animals were treated. For example, if someone mistreated or killed an animal that belonged to another person, they were required to make restitution, both for the harm caused to the animal and for the loss to its owner. Moreover, special attention was given to the care of working animals such as oxen and horses, which were essential to agriculture and transportation. The laws even banned unnecessary cruelty to animals, reflecting a society that understood the interdependence between humans and the animals they relied on for survival. The Hittites' unique approach to law offers a glimpse of a civilization that prioritized restoration over retribution, pragmatism over rigidity. This legal philosophy not only fostered social order, but also demonstrated a recognition of interconnectedness between individuals, families, and even the natural world. Their emphasis on fairness and practical solutions paved the way for other cultures to adapt and reinterpret their own legal systems. As the ancient world grew increasingly interconnected through trade and conquest, ideas about governance and justice flowed from empire to empire, influencing each other in ways that shaped history. The Hittite legal codes serve as a reminder that while justice and laws share universal roots, their interpretations and applications can differ greatly based on the values and needs of a society. From Mesopotamian retribution to Hittite restoration, we see how early civilizations experimented with different ways of maintaining order. But how did this experimentation evolve as cultures clashed and merged? To understand that, we must follow the threads of ancient laws into the Mediterranean, where civilizations like the Greeks and Romans began to forge systems of law that would lay the foundation for much of the modern legal world. While other ancient civilizations chiseled their laws into stone or pressed them into clay, Egypt took a different path, one that was rooted not in written codes, but in a profound philosophical principle, Maat. At the heart of ancient Egyptian society, Maat wasn't just a concept of law. It was the foundation of existence itself, representing truth, balance, harmony, and cosmic order. Maat was both a guiding force and a moral obligation for everyone, from the most humble farmer to the mighty pharaoh. Unlike the codified laws of Mesopotamia or the Hittites, Maat was unwritten. Its power lay in its universality, shaping the actions and decisions of rulers and citizens alike. To the ancient Egyptians, Maat was far more than a set of guidelines. It was the very structure of the universe. They believed that from the moment the world was created, Maat had been established to counter chaos, or Isfet. It wasn't just about fairness among people. It was the principle that ensured the sun rose each day, the Nile flooded to nourish the fields, and society flourished in harmony. Adhering to Maat wasn't merely a matter of personal morality. It was essential to maintaining cosmic stability. Any disruption to Maat, whether through dishonesty, injustice, or greed, risked tipping the balance of the universe itself. This profound philosophy deeply influenced Egyptian rulers, who were seen as the earthly representatives of Maat. It was their duty to uphold this cosmic order through their decisions and actions. Unlike Hammurabi, who framed his laws as divinely issued commands, Egyptian pharaohs embedded Maat in every aspect of their governance. They presided over courts, resolved disputes, and ensured that taxes and resources were distributed fairly. In essence, they were more than lawmakers. They were the stewards of balance and justice. Failure to govern in alignment with Maat wasn't just a political failing, it was a betrayal of their divine role. The courts in ancient Egypt often reflected this unwritten philosophy. Judges were expected to embody Maat in their verdicts, making decisions that upheld truth and fairness rather than strictly adhering to rigid rules. For instance, in resolving disputes, judges would focus not on enforcing a specific law, but on finding a solution that restored harmony. This flexibility allowed for a more human-centric approach to justice, one that considered the unique circumstances of each case. Punishments, when necessary, were intended to correct behavior and re-establish balance, rather than simply exact retribution. Maat also placed moral expectations on everyday citizens. Egyptians were encouraged to live virtuously, speaking truthfully, treating others with respect, and contributing to societal order. In fact, the concept of Maat extended into the afterlife. Egyptians believed that when a person died, their heart would be weighed against the feather of Maat in the Hall of Judgment. If their heart was light, free of deceit or wrongdoing, they would be granted eternal life in the afterworld. If it was heavy with sin, they would face destruction. This belief tied morality directly to one's eternal fate, creating a powerful incentive to live in alignment with Maat's principles. What made Maat so extraordinary was its ability to function as a moral compass in the absence of written laws. It raises a fascinating question: can morality alone serve as law? The Egyptians believed it could, as Maat's strength came not from the authority of rulers or inscriptions on stone, but from its universal acceptance. It was ingrained in their culture, their religion, and their understanding of life itself. However, this reliance on an unwritten principle also presented challenges. Without codified laws, justice depended heavily on the wisdom and integrity of those in power. If a ruler or judge failed to embody Maat, the system could falter, leading to corruption and inequality. Still, Maat's influence endures as a powerful reminder of the interconnectedness between morality, justice, and societal harmony. While it may not have been a legal code in the traditional sense, its principles provided Egypt with a framework for thousands of years, a framework that shaped not only how people lived but how they understood the universe. So, as we reflect on Maat, we're left with a thought-provoking lesson. Justice doesn't always need to be written to have a lasting impact, but how did these philosophical and legal foundations combine and evolve in later civilizations? To see how the ancient world built upon such ideas, we must turn our attention to the Greeks and Romans, whose legal systems would change the course of history. Among the most profound examples of law intertwined with faith comes from the Hebrew Bible and the Torah, the sacred texts of ancient Israel. For the Jewish people, law was far more than a tool for governance. It was a sacred covenant, a binding agreement between humanity and the divine. At the heart of this covenant lay the belief that the laws were not created by kings or earthly rulers, but were delivered directly by God. This gave them an unparalleled sense of authority and permanence, shaping not only ancient Jewish society, but also leaving a lasting influence on legal and moral systems across the globe. Perhaps the most famous and recognizable component of this divine legal framework is the Ten Commandments. Delivered to Moses on Mount Sinai, these 10 simple yet profound directives established a moral and spiritual foundation for society. Unlike many legal codes of the time, the Ten Commandments weren't focused solely on regulating property, trade, or governing punishment. Instead, they placed equal emphasis on personal morality and communal harmony. Directives like "you shall not murder" and "you shall not steal" laid the groundwork for protecting human life and property, but others, like "honor your father and your mother" and "remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy," sought to preserve relationships and spiritual well-being. What made the Ten Commandments particularly revolutionary was their universal scope. These were not laws reserved for the elite or focused on the practicalities of running a state. They were meant for everyone, rich or poor, ruler or servant. the Ten Commandments introduced the idea that moral behavior and personal accountability were not just societal obligations but divine requirements, a principle that transcended class or status. The very concept that a higher power could demand justice and ethical conduct from all people equally was groundbreaking in the ancient world. But the Torah's legal framework extended far beyond the Ten Commandments. It included a vast array of laws that governed nearly every aspect of life, many of which emphasized social justice, restitution, and communal responsibility. For instance, the Torah outlines provisions for caring for the poor, the outcast, and the vulnerable. In Leviticus, the commandment to leave the edges of one's fields unharvested so that the poor and strangers could glean from them illustrates a legal system designed to promote compassion and equity. Similarly, laws that called for fair treatment of workers and protections for widows and orphans underscored the Torah's emphasis on safeguarding the dignity and well-being of all members of society. Restitution was another cornerstone of these laws. If someone caused harm or stole from another, the Torah often required not only repayment but also an additional penalty to make amends. This principle of making the injured party whole reflects an ethic of responsibility and reconciliation. Such laws aim to restore balance within the community rather than simply inflicting punitive measures, echoing elements of restorative justice that would resurface in legal systems centuries later. The Torah also established dietary and ritual laws that set the Israelites apart from neighboring cultures. Restrictions on foods like pork and shellfish, along with guidelines for purity and cleanliness, were not just about physical health but about creating a distinct cultural and spiritual identity. These laws reminded the Jewish people of their covenant with God in their daily lives, reinforcing their sense of belonging to a divinely chosen community. Such practices strengthened communal bonds and instilled a deep sense of purpose and discipline. What's remarkable about the Torah's legal system is how deeply it connected the spiritual with the practical. The laws were not solely about enforcing order or resolving disputes. They were about aligning human behavior with divine will. Every rule, whether about justice, worship, or daily practices, was rooted in the idea of serving God and upholding the covenant. This interweaving of faith and law gave the Torah a moral and spiritual dimension that set it apart from many other ancient legal systems. The influence of these laws would reach far beyond ancient Israel. Over time, principles from the Torah, particularly those found in the Ten Commandments, would become integral to the ethical and legal traditions of other cultures and faiths. Christianity and Islam, both of which share roots in the Hebrew Bible, drew heavily from the Torah's moral and legal teachings. Even secular legal systems have been shaped by concepts of justice, fairness, and accountability that trace back to these ancient texts. By establishing law as a sacred covenant, the Torah offered a vision of justice that was both deeply personal and profoundly communal. It showed that laws could serve as more than a set of rules. They could be an expression of values, a guide for ethical living, and a bond that unites people with one another and with the divine. This legacy continues to resonate, reminding us that laws are not just about organizing society, but about defining what we stand for as human beings. From here, let's explore how such sacred mandates would go on to inspire other systems of law, as civilizations like Greece and Rome began to merge reason and governance in their own transformative ways. Now let's travel east to ancient India, where the concept of law was closely intertwined with morality, religion, and the overarching idea of righteousness. In this land, the foundations of justice were laid down in the Dharmashastras, ancient texts that served as guides to Dharma, a term that can best be translated as righteous living. Unlike the rigid legal codes of Hammurabi or the divine commandments of the Torah, the Dharmashastras were not simply a compilation of laws. They were deeply philosophical texts, blending legal principles with ethical values and spiritual ideals, creating a framework that guided not just behavior but an entire way of life. The Dharmashastras, composed between 500 BC and 500 CE, are part of a larger body of Sanskrit literature. Among the most significant of these texts is the Manusmriti, or the Laws of Manu, a seminal work that laid out detailed instructions for individuals, families, and entire communities. What made these texts unique was their connection to Dharma, a concept central to Indian philosophy. Dharma is not just a set of rules, it is a multi-layered idea encompassing duty, morality, law, and the universal order. According to the Dharmashastras, living in accordance with Dharma was the key to personal harmony and societal stability. One of the defining features of the Dharmashastras was their focus on roles and responsibilities within a society organized by caste. In ancient India, society was stratified into 4 varnas or social classes: Brahmins, the learned and priestly class; Kshatriyas, the warriors and rulers; Vaishyas, the merchants and agriculturists; and Shudras, the laborers and service providers. The Dharmashastras prescribed specific duties and obligations for each caste, emphasizing that fulfilling one's dharma according to their role was essential for maintaining societal order. For instance, Brahmins were expected to dedicate their lives to study, teaching, and spiritual guidance, while Kshatriyas were tasked with protecting the land and its people, often through warfare or governance. Vaishyas were responsible for trade and commerce, supporting the economy, and Shudras were to serve the other classes. This caste-based system of Dharma reinforced a sense of purpose and interdependence, ensuring that each member of society contributed to the larger whole. Yet, it also created a framework in which hierarchy was rigidly maintained, a legacy that continues to spark debate and reflection in modern times. The Dharmashastras also placed great importance on family obligations and ethical conduct. They offered guidance on everything from marriage and inheritance to rituals and daily practices. For example, the Manusmriti outlined rules for the proper treatment of family members, respect for elders, and the responsibilities of husbands and wives. Marriage was seen not just as a personal bond but as a sacred duty, essential for the continuation of family and societal harmony. Similarly, parents were expected to educate and nurture their children, preparing them to fulfill their own dharma. What is particularly fascinating about the Dharmashastras is their adaptability. Over centuries, as Indian society evolved, these texts were reinterpreted to address new challenges and changing circumstances. The notion of dharma itself is fluid, often contextual rather than absolute. What was considered righteous in one situation might vary in another, reflecting the complexities of life and the need for flexibility in applying principles. This adaptability enabled the Dharmashastras to remain relevant, guiding societies across centuries with teachings rooted in timeless values, yet capable of evolving to meet the needs of the present. The underlying idea behind these texts was that the law was not separate from morality or religion. Rather, all three were interconnected, forming a holistic system that aimed to sustain society by fostering shared values and promoting harmony. Unlike in some ancient civilizations where laws were enforced externally by rulers or judges, in the Dharmashastra tradition, the emphasis was often on self-regulation. Each individual was encouraged to internalize Dharma, living in alignment with principles of truth, compassion, and responsibility. In reflecting on the Dharmashastras, we see how culturally specific laws can serve as a source of unity. By rooting legal and ethical standards in the shared values of a community, these texts provided a sense of identity and belonging. They reinforced the idea that justice and morality are not merely external impositions but deeply personal commitments to living in harmony with others and the world. The Dharmashastras offer us a glimpse into an ancient society where law was not simply about rules, but about creating a life of balance and purpose. As we move forward, we'll see how this interplay of tradition, morality, and adaptability continues to shape legal systems around the world, providing lessons that remain relevant even today. In ancient China, the quest for order and stability led to the development of two profoundly different schools of thought, legalism and Confucianism. Each offered a distinct approach to governance and the role of laws in society, and their contrasting views sparked debates that continue to resonate in discussions of justice and humanity today. These philosophies, emerging during the tumultuous Warring States period, a time of political chaos and fragmentation, were responses to the same question: how can society achieve harmony? Yet their answers couldn't have been more different. Legalism took a pragmatic, and some might say pessimistic, view of human nature. Its central belief was that people were inherently selfish and short-sighted, driven primarily by personal gain. According to legalist thinkers like Han Feizi, this meant that strict laws and harsh punishments were the only way to maintain order. Under legalism, the letter of the law reigned supreme, and rulers were encouraged to wield absolute authority, ensuring that all individuals, regardless of rank, were subject to the same rigid standards. Rewards and punishments were meticulously outlined, leaving no room for interpretation or leniency. The idea was simple: fear bred compliance, and compliance ensured stability. Legalism's influence reached its peak during the Qin dynasty under the leadership of Qin Shi Huang, the emperor who famously unified China. Legalist principles were the backbone of his administration, and the results were undeniable. By enforcing uniform laws, standardizing weights, measures, and even written script, Qin Shi Huang was able to establish a centralized state that could govern vast territories efficiently. However, this efficiency came at a cost. The legalist emphasis on harsh punishments and suppression of dissent created a climate of fear. Historical accounts describe burnt books, silenced scholars, and public executions. While legalism succeeded in achieving short-term stability, its rigidity left little room for trust or loyalty, and the dynasty ultimately collapsed shortly after Qin Shi Huang's death. In contrast, Confucianism presented a far more optimistic view of human nature, rooted in the teachings of Confucius. Rather than focusing on laws and punishments, Confucianism emphasized moral education, self-cultivation, and the importance of relationships. Confucius believed that people were essentially good, but that they needed guidance to fulfill their potential. He argued that harmony could be achieved not through fear, but through the cultivation of virtue both in individuals and in society as a whole. At the heart of Confucianism was the concept of ren, often translated as benevolence or humaneness. Confucius believed that by fostering ren, individuals could act with compassion and integrity, promoting harmony within their families and communities. Another foundational element was the importance of filial piety, deep respect and devotion to one's parents and ancestors. Confucianism taught that strong families were the cornerstone of a stable society and that good governance began in the home. Confucianism also framed the ideal ruler not as a strict enforcer of laws but as a moral role model. A ruler's virtue would inspire the people to act virtuously themselves. While laws and regulations weren't dismissed entirely, they were seen as a last resort. Effective governance depended on moral leadership, not fear of punishment. This philosophy deeply influenced Chinese society, shaping its values and traditions for centuries. The tension between these two views, legalism's focus on control and Confucianism's focus on moral development, highlights a universal debate about how best to achieve justice and order. Is it better to govern through fear or through trust? Should the law be rigid and impartial, or flexible and grounded in human relationships? these questions transcend ancient China, touching on fundamental issues that societies around the world continue to grapple with today. Ultimately, neither philosophy fully prevailed over the other. Following the Qin dynasty's collapse, the Han dynasty adopted a blended approach, incorporating Confucian ideals into the framework of legalist administration. This synthesis allowed for the efficiency of legalism while softening its harsher edges with Confucian values of compassion and moral guidance. The result was a system that balanced the rule of law with the cultivation of virtue, a compromise that would define Chinese governance for centuries. The legacy of legalism and Confucianism isn't confined to history books. It lives on in contemporary debates about how to balance law and morality, authority and compassion. These ancient philosophies remind us that the pursuit of justice is as much about understanding human nature as it is about crafting rules. From strict legal codes to moral guidance, the search for harmony is a journey that continues today, shaped by the lessons of the past. If ancient Mesopotamia gave us the first written laws and ancient India tied law to morality, then ancient Greece brought the radical idea that lawmaking could and should be the responsibility of the people themselves. It was in the Greek city-states, particularly Athens, that the seeds of democracy and collective governance began to take root, but this shift didn't happen overnight. It was the result of a long, challenging evolution, shaped by the influence of key lawmakers like Draco and Solon, whose legacies highlight both the struggles and triumphs of building a system of law that aimed to balance power between the elite and the common citizen. Let's begin with Draco, a figure whose name has become synonymous with severity. Around the 7th century BCE, Athens was in turmoil. The city was divided by deep social tensions between the aristocracy, who held most of the power, and the common people, many of whom were mired in debt, often forced into servitude or even enslaved when they couldn't repay their loan. In an attempt to bring order to this chaos, Draco was tasked with creating a legal code. His solution, a set of laws so unforgiving that the word draconian still describes excessively harsh measures. Draco's legal code was one of the first in Athens to be written down and publicly displayed, which was a significant step forward in creating transparency. In theory, this meant everyone, not just the aristocracy, would know the laws and the consequences of breaking them, but the reality of Draco's reforms was far less equitable. His punishments were ruthless, with death prescribed for even minor offenses like stealing a piece of fruit. While this rigidity may have been intended to deter crime and assert authority, it also reflected the overwhelming power of the aristocracy, who remained largely untouched by the laws they imposed on others. Draco's laws may have brought some semblance of order, but they did little to address the root causes of Athens' inequality. Enter Solon, one of the most celebrated figures in Athenian history, often hailed as the father of democracy. Appointed as an archon or chief magistrate in 594 BCE, Solon inherited a city on the brink of collapse. Social unrest had reached its peak. The poor were burdened by crushing debt, many had lost their land, and Athens teetered dangerously close to civil war. Solon's reforms aimed not just to stabilize society but to fundamentally reshape it. One of Solon's most impactful acts was known as the seisachtheia, or shaking off of burdens. He cancelled all debts and forbade the practice of enslaving individuals for failing to repay their loans, a transformative measure that freed many from servitude and gave the lower classes a chance to rebuild their lives. But Solon didn't stop there. He also reorganized Athenian society by creating 4 economic classes based on wealth rather than birth, giving more citizens the opportunity to participate in government. While the wealthiest still held the highest offices, even the poorest citizens were granted a voice in the assembly where they could vote on key issues, a revolutionary step toward more inclusive governance. Solon's reforms extended to the judiciary as well. He established a system in which citizens could appeal decisions made by magistrates, allowing for greater accountability and reducing the unchecked power of the elite. By involving ordinary people in legal processes, Solon planted the idea that justice should not only serve the wealthy but also protect the common citizen. However, it's important to note that Solon's reforms didn't fully resolve Athens' struggles. They were more of a starting point than a conclusion. Social tensions persisted, and Athens would undergo further upheavals before democracy truly took hold. But Solon's vision of balancing the interests of different classes and empowering citizens to have a say in governance laid the groundwork for what would later become one of the world's first democratic systems. What makes this chapter of history so compelling is how the Greeks began to view lawmaking as a shared responsibility, rather than a tool wielded solely by rulers or elites. The notion that laws could be debated, revised, and agreed upon by citizens marked a dramatic departure from the top-down governance of earlier civilizations. While democracy in ancient Athens was far from perfect, excluding women, slaves, and non-citizens, it introduced a revolutionary principle that the power to create and shape laws could rest with the people. The legacy of Draco and Solon reminds us that developing a fair and just legal system is often a messy, imperfect process. It requires balancing competing interests, addressing deep-seated inequalities, and perhaps most importantly, trusting in the collective wisdom of a community. This idea of participatory lawmaking would go on to inspire societies across centuries, forming the backbone of modern democratic systems. But how did this idea evolve further, and how did the Greeks refine it into the sophisticated institutions we recognize today? To answer that, we'll need to look at how the principles of democracy and lawmaking flourished in Athens, paving the way for a system that would influence the world for millennia. Picture the bustling heart of ancient Rome, the Forum. Merchants haggle over goods, citizens gather to discuss politics, and magistrates deliberate over disputes. It was here, amid the vibrant chaos of Roman life, that one of the most influential legal documents in human history was born, the 12 Tables. Created in the mid-5th century BCE, these stone tablets represented Rome's first attempt to codify its laws, carving them into a form that all citizens could see, understand, and follow. The 12 Tables didn't just serve the Romans of their time. They laid the foundation for Western legal traditions that endure to this day. Before the 12 Tables, Roman law was a patchwork of unwritten customs and oral traditions. These were often enforced arbitrarily by the patricians, the elite class who held most of the power. For the plebeians or commoners, this lack of transparency led to frustration and mistrust. How could justice be served when the rules were hidden and decisions rested solely on the whims of those in power? The plebeians' demands for fairness and accountability reached a boiling point, sparking fierce social tension between the classes. It was this struggle, known as the conflict of the orders, that led to the creation of the 12 Tables. In response to this unrest, Roman leaders agreed to draft a public set of laws, visible for all to see. The result was the 12 Tables, engraved on bronze plaques and displayed prominently in the Forum. These laws covered a broad spectrum of public and private life, addressing everything from property disputes and debt to family rights, inheritance, and even issues of personal injury. By putting the rules in writing, the 12 Tables created a legal framework that was consistent and accessible, reducing the chance for manipulation by those in power. One of the most striking aspects of the 12 Tables is their focus on property and ownership, reflecting the agricultural roots of Roman society. For example, they laid out clear procedures for settling land disputes, an issue critical in a culture where land represented wealth and status. If two individuals claimed the same piece of land, the law required a formal legal process to determine ownership, ensuring that neither party could simply assert dominance unchecked. The idea that property rights should be guaranteed by law and not subject to arbitrary seizure became a cornerstone of Roman legal thought, influencing legal systems around the globe. Family law was another significant area addressed by the 12 Tables. They codified the authority of the paterfamilias, or male head of the household, granting him significant control over his family members, including the power to arrange marriages or sell family assets. While this may seem harsh by modern standards, these provisions reflected the hierarchical and patriarchal nature of Roman society. At the same time, the very existence of laws governing family matters introduced a measure of predictability and order. By defining these rights and responsibilities, the 12 Tables ensured that family disputes could be resolved through legal means rather than personal vendettas. The 12 Tables also touched on criminal law, introducing punishments for theft, assault, and damage to property. While the penalties might seem severe by today's standards, punishments ranged from fines to physical retribution. They reflected a society striving to balance order and deterrence. Importantly, the Tables established the principle of proportionate justice. For instance, they distinguished between intentional harm and accidental damage, applying different penalties based on the nature and context of the offense. This early attention to fairness and context in dispensing justice planted the seeds of later legal concepts like due process. One of the most revolutionary aspects of the 12 Tables was their focus on legal equality. By making the laws public, the Tables gave all citizens, both plebeians and patricians, the ability to know their rights and obligations. This transparency was a radical departure from earlier systems where the elite could manipulate unwritten laws to their advantage. It marked a step toward the idea that justice should apply equally to everyone under the law, a principle that would become central to Western legal tradition. The 12 Tables also introduced procedural rights, ensuring that legal disputes followed a clear process. For example, they outlined steps for summoning someone to court, presenting evidence, and resolving cases. While these procedures may seem basic now, they were groundbreaking at the time, creating a foundation for due process and fair trials. These ideas would evolve over centuries, forming the backbone of legal systems in Europe and beyond. Though the 12 Tables themselves eventually fell out of direct use, their influence endured. They became a cornerstone of Roman law, which was later codified and expanded under the Roman Empire's famous legal scholars. Over time, Roman legal principles, including those laid out in the 12 Tables, spread across Europe and served as the bedrock for many modern legal systems. The 12 Tables remind us of the transformative power of written law. By carving rules into stone for all citizens to see and follow, Rome established not just order but a shared sense of justice and accountability. They taught us that laws are only as strong as the trust and transparency they foster, a lesson that continues to echo in courtrooms around the world. But how did Roman law evolve from these humble beginnings into the sophisticated legal system that would define the empire? To answer that, we'll explore the rise of Roman jurisprudence and its enduring legacy in shaping law as we know it today. Throughout history, few forces have shaped legal systems as profoundly as religion. From ancient Mesopotamia to medieval Europe, the intertwining of divine authority and law established frameworks of governance that profoundly influenced societies. Religion elevated laws beyond merely human constructs, imbuing them with a sense of sacredness and permanence. Whether through the imposing laws of Babylon, the Torah's covenantal commandments, or the moral tenets of Christianity, invoking divine authority gave rulers a powerful tool to legitimize their rule and enforce societal order. But as we'll see, combining religion with law was a double-edged sword. It could unify people under shared values, but it could also sow division when interpretations of faith clashed. To begin, consider the ancient Mesopotamians, whose gods played a central role in legitimizing both rulers and their laws. The famous Code of Hammurabi, for example, begins not with a simple preamble but with a declaration of divine will. King Hammurabi is depicted receiving his authority directly from Shamash, the god of justice, a vivid reminder that the Babylonian laws were believed to be more than human decrees. They were mandates from the gods themselves. This divine connection granted Hammurabi's laws an unchallengeable authority. After all, to question the king's rulings was to question the will of the divine. For the people of Mesopotamia, this link between law and divinity reinforced not only the king's legitimacy, but also the perception that justice was a sacred responsibility. Similarly, in the ancient Hebrew tradition, laws went beyond the practicalities of societal governance and were deeply tied to the covenant between God and the people of Israel. The Ten Commandments and the broader legal framework outlined in the Torah weren't merely seen as guidelines for maintaining order. They were sacred obligations handed down directly from God to Moses on Mount Sinai. This divine origin gave the laws their moral weight, uniting the Israelites under a shared spiritual and legal identity. In times of crisis or exile, adherence to these divinely inspired laws became a way of preserving cultural cohesion, ensuring that the Jewish people maintained their identity even when scattered across the ancient world. In ancient Egypt, the principles of Maat served as yet another example of law rooted in religion. Maat represented cosmic order, truth, and balance, a sacred principle believed to maintain harmony in the universe. Egyptian pharaohs didn't simply rule over their subjects. They were seen as earthly embodiments of Maat, tasked with ensuring that justice and balance were upheld. Decisions in courts and governance were guided by Maat, grounding the legal system in a moral framework that transcended individual rulers. This divine ideology helped unify the kingdom and provided a shared understanding of justice that underpinned Egyptian society for centuries. As we move closer to the rise of Christianity in the late Roman Empire, the interplay between religion and law took on new dimensions. The Roman Emperor Constantine, for instance, famously embraced Christianity, setting the stage for the eventual fusion of Roman legal traditions with Christian doctrine. This shift introduced the idea that moral laws rooted in faith could influence the broader legal landscape. Over time, Christian ethics shaped laws surrounding marriage, family, and morality, creating a lasting impact on Western legal systems. However, the fusion of religion and law hasn't always been harmonious. While it can act as a unifying force, instilling shared values and principles, it can also create division. Competing interpretations of divine will have often led to conflict, both within societies and between them. In medieval Europe, for instance, tension between secular rulers and the church frequently flared, with both sides claiming the sole right to interpret and enforce divine law. Similarly, in polytheistic empires like Rome or Mesopotamia, differing allegiances to gods could spark discord between diverse populations under a single rule. And even today, societies continue to wrestle with the balance between laws inspired by religious principles and the need for inclusive, secular governance. Religion's influence on ancient legal systems highlights a deeper tension between power and ethics in lawmaking. On one hand, invoking divine authority has historically provided laws with moral legitimacy and societal cohesion. On the other, it raises questions about whose interpretation of the divine is privileged, and what happens when these interpretations collide. This relationship between religion and law serves as a reminder of how deeply human societies have sought to ground their rules in something greater than themselves, whether through gods, philosophy, or ideals of justice. This sets the stage for broader themes of ethics and power in lawmaking, where the question of who gets to create and enforce laws becomes not just a matter of governance, but one of morality and fairness. What's fascinating about early legal codes, whether carved into stone, pressed into clay, or woven into oral traditions, is that despite vast differences in geography, culture, and language, they often address the same fundamental issues. They may have emerged in vastly different societies, yet these ancient laws reveal universal concerns that transcend time and place. Let's take a closer look at the shared themes among these codes and explore what they tell us about the human need for order, fairness, and cooperation. One of the most consistent elements across these early legal systems was the emphasis on property rights. Whether in the city-states of Mesopotamia, the fields of ancient China, or the marketplaces of Egypt, property represented stability, wealth, and survival. The protection of land, livestock, tools, and other resources was vital, not just for individuals but for the prosperity of entire communities. For example, the Code of Hammurabi in Babylon addressed property disputes with meticulous detail. It outlined specific penalties for theft, outlined rules for renting farmland, and even described what should happen if a neighbor's negligence caused damage to your crop fields. Similarly, in the Hittite laws of Anatolia, we find provisions that required restitution for stolen livestock or damages caused to shared resources like water or grazing pastures. In societies built around agriculture and trade, property wasn't merely an individual concern, it was the backbone of the economy. Protecting it was essential for maintaining harmony and trust. Another universal theme was the regulation of theft and murder, ensuring that acts of violence or dishonesty didn't spiral into chaos. What's intriguing here is not just the existence of penalties, but how societies varied in their approach depending on their values. In some legal systems, like Hammurabi's, punishment for theft or murder could be incredibly harsh, often involving death or severe physical retribution. Hammurabi's eye for an eye principle was designed to enforce strict accountability and deter wrongdoing. In contrast, the Hittite laws, while still punitive, leaned more toward financial restitution. If a theft occurred, the offender would often pay back multiple times the value of the stolen goods, reflecting an emphasis on restoration over revenge. This dual-focus, punishment to maintain order and restitution to restore balance, reveals a shared human effort to address wrongdoing in a way that preserved societal stability. Marriage, too, was a common focus of early laws, underscoring its role as a cornerstone of social structure. Across civilizations, marriage wasn't just a private matter. It was deeply linked to inheritance, alliances, and the organization of families. In ancient Egypt, for example, laws ensured that both husbands and wives had certain rights to property within marriage, while divorce agreements often included provisions to ensure fairness for both parties. Similarly, the Torah outlined clear rules governing marriage, from dowries and inheritance to obligations between spouses. These laws ensured that marital bonds didn't just serve individual interests, but reinforced the economic and social fabric of the community, ensuring the continuity of lineage and stability. Trade was another universal concern. From Mesopotamian city-states to thriving Mediterranean ports, early legal systems recognized the importance of regulating commerce to ensure fairness and foster cooperation. Written laws often detailed rules for contracts, weights and measures, and penalties for fraud. In the ancient Indian Dharmashastras texts, for instance, trade regulations were intertwined with moral guidelines, ensuring that merchants acted in accordance with Dharma or righteous conduct, a principle that emphasized honesty and fair dealing. Similarly, the 12 Tables of Rome established rules for business exchanges, setting expectations for contracts, loans, and repayment. These laws weren't just about preventing disputes, they built the trust necessary for economic growth. What ties all these elements together, property, crime, marriage, and trade, is the shared human desire for fairness and stability. Regardless of location or cultural context, early societies recognized that without rules, chaos would prevail. Laws became the tools through which fairness could be enacted, disputes resolved, and trust maintained. They reflected the values of their time while addressing universal human needs, creating a blueprint for cooperation that still resonates today. It's remarkable to think that even as these societies developed in relative isolation, they came to similar conclusions about what was essential for order and harmony. These shared themes remind us that, at our core, humans have always sought ways to live together more peacefully. The legal codes of the ancient world weren't just about managing day-to-day life, they were about shaping civilizations and laying the foundation for the systems of law and justice that continue to guide us in the modern world. It's easy to think of ancient laws as relics of distant civilizations, disconnected from the world we live in today. But the truth is, many of the principles and ideas embedded in modern legal systems owe their roots to the laws created thousands of years ago. While the societies of ancient Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, and beyond may have faded into history, their approach to justice and governance has left a profound and lasting legacy. Concepts like proportional punishment, trial by evidence, and the sanctity of contracts continue to serve as cornerstones of legal systems worldwide, revealing just how timeless the ideas of these early lawmakers truly are. Let's start with the idea of proportional punishment, a principle most famously represented by Hammurabi's Code and its eye for an eye philosophy. While it may sound harsh to modern ears, the intention behind this rule was one of fairness. The punishment should fit the crime, a revolutionary idea in a time when justice was often arbitrary and punishments excessive. This principle of proportionality influenced later systems of law, where the severity of a crime determines the severity of the punishment. Today, you can see echoes of this concept in criminal codes worldwide, where courts work to ensure that penalties are appropriate to the offense. The idea of proportionate justice, itself rooted in ancient codes, remains fundamental to ensuring fairness and equity in legal systems, preventing punishment from veering into cruelty or excess. Another enduring contribution from these ancient lawmakers is the emphasis on evidence in trials. In the ancient world, justice systems often relied on supernatural methods to determine guilt, such as trial by ordeal rituals where divine judgment was believed to reveal the truth. But early legal codes, such as those in Mesopotamia and later in Rome, began to stress the importance of tangible evidence and witnesses. For example, the laws of Ur-Nammu, one of the oldest written codes, required testimony to establish guilt in criminal cases. This focus on evidence paved the way for the judicial principles we value today, such as establishing facts through investigations and presenting proof in court. Modern legal systems rely heavily on these ancient ideas, ensuring that judgments are based on evidence rather than superstition or arbitrary decisions. The sanctity of contracts is another area where ancient laws laid an enduring foundation. In societies like Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Rome, the rise of trade and commerce made it essential to formalize agreements between individuals. Laws governing contracts were designed to ensure that each party upheld their commitments, fostering trust and economic growth. For example, Hammurabi's code included detailed regulations for business transactions, from loans and interest rates to the leasing of farmland, creating a clear framework for resolving disputes. Roman law took these ideas even further, codifying rules for contracts that emphasized fairness and mutual consent. The Roman focus on contracts influenced European legal traditions and eventually the legal systems of countries around the world. Today, whether you're signing a lease, negotiating a business deal, or agreeing to terms and conditions on a website, you're participating in a tradition of contractual law that dates back millennia. Even beyond specific legal principles, the very idea of codifying laws, making them visible, accessible, and applicable to all, originated with these ancient lawmakers. The 12 Tables of Rome, for instance, established the precedent for creating a public, written legal code, ensuring that all citizens, regardless of status, could know their rights and obligations. This transparency was a significant step toward the rule of law, a concept that continues to underpin modern democratic societies. By making laws public and consistent, ancient codes sought to curb the whims of rulers and protect individuals from arbitrary rule, a principle that remains integral to modern governance. Of course, these ancient systems were products of their time, often reflecting the inequalities and hierarchies of their societies. Laws favoring the wealthy or treating different classes unequally were common. Yet, even within these flawed frameworks, the seeds of concepts like fairness, accountability, and justice were sown. These ideas have been refined and expanded through centuries of legal evolution, but their origins remind us of how human societies have always sought ways to live together in harmony. In reflecting on ancient laws, it's clear that their influence is anything but distant. They are the threads woven into the fabric of modern legal systems, reminding us of humanity's enduring quest for justice and order. From proportional punishment to the rule of evidence, from the sanctity of contracts to the transparency of codified laws, the principles crafted by the first lawmakers continue to guide and shape the societies we live in today. This legacy underscores an enduring truth. Laws are not just rules, they are reflections of the values, aspirations, and progress of the civilizations that create them. And as we build on these foundations, we honor the wisdom of the past while charting a course for a more just future. When we think of ancient laws, we often picture towering stone tablets or carefully etched clay tablets, artifacts that have survived the test of time, bridging the gap between distant civilizations and our modern world. But as much as these written codes have taught us, they represent only a fraction of humanity's early legal systems. Not every civilization left behind records as enduring as Hammurabi's Code or the 12 Tables. Some legal traditions remain hidden, locked away in undeciphered scripts, lost to war and decay, or obscured by time. These mysteries remind us of how fragile our understanding of history can be, and they invite us to imagine what might be hidden in these untold stories. Take, for example, the enigmatic Indus Valley civilization, which thrived over 4,000 years ago along the Indus River and its surrounding regions in what is now modern-day India and Pakistan. This advanced civilization boasted meticulously planned cities, sophisticated drainage systems, and evidence of large-scale trade. Yet despite its clear organizational complexity, we don't know what laws, if any, governed its people. The primary reason: the Indus Valley script, a series of symbols carved onto seals, pottery shards, and tablets, remains undeciphered. Scholars have long debated whether these symbols represent a full writing system or a proto-script that primarily served administrative purposes. Without the ability to read these inscriptions, we can only speculate about how the Indus Valley people maintained order, resolved disputes, or managed their bustling trade networks. What kind of justice system might have complemented their advanced urban planning? Did they rely on written laws like Mesopotamia, or was their society governed by oral traditions passed down from generation to generation? These are questions we may never fully answer, but the mystery only deepens our fascination with this lost civilization. Similarly, across the Aegean Sea, we find the Minoans of ancient Crete, an early Bronze Age civilization that flourished between 2000 and 1500 BC. Known for their striking frescoes and the grand palaces of Knossos, the Minoans were among the most advanced societies of their time. Yet, no definitive evidence of a legal code has been uncovered. Like the Indus Valley civilization, the Minoans left behind enigmatic scripts known as Linear A and later Linear B. While Linear B has been deciphered, revealing details about their successors, the Mycenaeans, Linear A remains a puzzle. Could the inscriptions in Linear A hold the secrets of Minoan governance, perhaps lists of decrees, laws, or administrative rulings? Or was their legal system rooted in oral traditions which vanished as their civilization declined? Without access to their language, we are left piecing together fragments of their world, imagining how they might have balanced trade, religion, and governance within their island society. Even when physical records exist, they don't always survive the passage of time. Wars, conquests, and natural disasters have erased countless artifacts of past civilizations, taking their legal systems with them. The Library of Alexandria is a haunting example of how much knowledge has been lost to history. This legendary center of learning, housing tens of thousands of scrolls and manuscripts, reportedly contained records of laws, treaties, and governance from across the ancient world. When it was destroyed, whether by accident, conquest, or neglect, entire chapters of human history may have disappeared, including insights into how ancient societies structured their laws. These gaps in our knowledge remind us of how fragile and fragmentary history truly is. For every code of Hammurabi that survives, how many similar systems were lost? And for every ancient language we've decoded, how many others remain silent, their stories locked away in symbols we cannot yet understand? Each mystery underscores how much of history depends on preservation, luck, and the painstaking work of archaeologists and linguists. But these gaps also spark something else: speculation. They invite us to consider the possibilities of what might have been. Could the Indus Valley have pioneered legal innovations that predate those of Mesopotamia? Was the Minoan society more egalitarian than its neighbors, reflected in laws we may never know? These unsolved mysteries remind us that history is alive, full of questions that push the boundaries of what we think we know. And while not having all the answers can be frustrating, it also leaves room for imagination, discovery, and the ongoing pursuit of knowledge. As we reflect on these lost and undeciphered legal systems, we're reminded of the delicate thread that ties the past to the present. Each discovery, whether an ancient seal or a script etched in stone, is a step closer to completing the puzzle of our shared human story. And yet, the spaces in between, the questions we can't yet answer, are just as vital. They remind us that history isn't static, it's a conversation, one that challenges us to keep searching and wondering. So, what might the laws of the Indus Valley or the Minoans teach us if we could uncover them? And how might they reshape what we think we know about the origins of justice and governance? These are the mysteries that keep history alive, and they're far from solved. The first lawmakers and the codes they created are far more than mere historical curiosities frozen in time. They are the very bedrock upon which modern society was built. These ancient laws, carved into stone, etched into clay, or woven into oral traditions, represent the earliest attempts to tackle universal human challenges: how to live together, how to resolve disputes, and how to define right from wrong. They were born out of necessity, shaped by the unique cultures that crafted them, but their influence reaches far beyond their own eras. They continue to echo in every courtroom, every debate over justice, and every effort to create fairer systems of governance. By examining the origins of law, we gain remarkable insight into the human condition and our timeless pursuit of order and morality. Ancient Mesopotamia's stern punishments for theft and deceit remind us of the struggle to maintain trust in growing communities. The Torah's moral laws reflect a deep connection between spirituality and justice. The 12 Tables of Rome emphasized transparency and the rule of law, principles that form the core of modern democracies. Even without deciphering the lost legal traditions of the Indus Valley or the Minoans, we see a shared thread, an unwavering drive to establish rules that protect, guide, and unite people. Whether through harsh retributions or philosophies of balance and restoration, early lawmakers sought to answer questions that remain relevant today. What is fairness? Who enforces it, and how do we shape laws to serve everyone, not just the powerful? These ancient codes also teach us a profound lesson. The values and intentions behind laws are often just as important as the laws themselves. Hammurabi's declaration that a ruler should cause justice to prevail in the land and destroy the wicked resonates in modern debates over the role of governments. Are laws meant purely to control, or should they also uplift and protect? The Confucian emphasis on moral leadership challenges us to ask whether laws alone are enough to maintain harmony, or if ethical behavior must guide those who enforce them. Questions like these have endured for millennia, evolving alongside societies but never losing their relevance. What's especially remarkable is how these early systems continue to influence us long after the civilizations that created them have faded away. The concept of equality before the law, the foundation of evidence-based trials, the sanctity of agreements, these ideas were pioneered by ancient lawmakers and are now fundamental pillars of justice worldwide. Even today, when we work to improve our legal systems, we are building on the foundation they began to lay. Their legacy reminds us that justice is not a static achievement, but an ongoing process shaped by the past and reimagined for the future. As we wrestle with the complexities of modern governance, how to balance freedom and accountability, fairness and practicality, the wisdom of the first lawmakers continues to resonate. By studying their work, we not only honor their ingenuity but also equip ourselves to tackle the challenges of our own time. Their efforts, whether inscribed in stone or passed down through generations, remind us of the shared responsibility we all bear in creating a just world. So, as we close this exploration into the codes that shaped ancient societies, take a moment to reflect on how these laws influence your life today. Every time you see a legal debate, exercise your rights as a citizen, or witness a call for justice, you are seeing their legacy in action. And as we look to the future, let their lessons guide us not just as a reminder of where we came from, but as a template for where we want to go. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history's most fascinating mysteries. If you enjoyed this dive into the origins of law and justice, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for weekly explorations into the hidden stories that shape the world. Until next time, keep uncovering the past to better understand the present and shape a brighter future.